The Earth's ice sheet is disappearing, and very quickly. For example, glaciers in Glacier National Park in Montana are under the threat of complete melting by 2033 due to climatic changes. Since 1850, the total number of big glaciers in this area has decreased from 100 to 25. Yet this serious problem also has another side. Such natural processes lift the veil hiding unique discoveries that used to rest ice cores. And every new discovery brings humanity closer to solving mysteries of both the past and the future. Recently, scientists walked into an amazing finding: a giant virus at the age of more than 30,000 years, which used to live in permanently frozen soils near the Kolyma River in Russia. According to the scientists, such viruses are absolutely safe for people since they live parasitically on amoebas only. Scientists also do not exclude a possibility of other viruses living in permanently frozen subsoil that would live parasitically not only on single-celled organisms. For example, global warming can wake up viruses posing a potential risk to humans. There is also a slight possibility that pathogenic microbes that used to infest ancient people can revive and infest modern people. These disease-inducing microorganisms can be presented by usual bacteria that can be treated using antibiotics or medicine-resistant bacteria, and even dangerous viruses. If they did not die out long ago, our immune system is not ready to confront them. Anyway, it is the biggest scientifically described virus hunting amoebas by today. Ice Maiden. In 1999, at the border of Argentina and Chile, in the ices of the Yuyayaco volcano at the height of 6,707 meters, a body of a teenage girl from the Incas was found. She looked as if she had died a couple weeks ago. Scientists found out that the girl, aged between 13 and 15 years, called the Ice Maiden, was killed as a result of a blunt force head trauma 1,500 years ago during a religious ritual. Low temperature helped to preserve her body and hair, together with the clothes and sacred objects, in perfect state. Next to her there were plates with food, golden and silver statues, and an unusual headwear made of white feathers of an unknown bird. Scientists also found bodies of two more victims of the Incas, a boy and a girl aged between 6 and 7 years. During their studies, the scientists discovered that the children were prepared for the cult for a long time. The Incas fed them with elite products: llama meat and corn, cocaine and alcohol. According to the historians, the Incas chose for their rituals the most beautiful children. Frozen mammoth. In 2010, in Siberia, which is probably the most unknown region of Russia, a female woolly mammoth weighing 1 ton and called Yuka was found. She was lying in permanently frozen soils of Siberia for 39,000 years. But her body has been preserved so well that you can even see its wool and muscle tissue. And for the first time ever, scientists managed to draw blood from a prehistoric animal. They put forward an assumption that probably the mammoth got stuck in a swamp and died, since the lower part of its body was intact thanks to the surrounding ice. Although some parts of its body completely disappeared, such a finding possesses great scientific value. Scientists from South Korea declared that thanks to DNA samples taken from Yuka's body, they have a chance to clone mammoths, thus reviving the whole species. If it happens, researchers won't have to go to Siberia in search of woolly mammoths anymore. Ötzi's mummy. In September 1991, 2 German tourists walked into an unusual finding: the perfectly preserved remains of a human body frozen in ice. They thought that these remains belonged to an alpinist that had recently disappeared in the ice. Yet, after the research, the scientists discovered that the mummified man was no less than 5,000 years old. This discovery was unique in its own way, since never before had scientists managed to restore an absolutely intact body of the Chalcolithic period. Ötzi's stomach contained undigested residues of his last meal, which meant that he died unexpectedly. Later on, X-rays showed that there was an arrowhead in the mummy's shoulder. It proved that 5,000 years ago, Ötzi was killed when fighting with an enemy. Soon after his death, Ötzi's body was frozen in ice and covered with snow, which saved him from predators. And since his body was lying in a deep pit, his body remained intact after the glacier movement. The DNA analysis has proven that an ancient Iceman has at least 19 living relatives. Made in India. One day, a French alpinist suddenly found a treasure during his ascent of Mont Blanc. It was a small box blooming to the surface of the Glacier des Bassons. The box contained little bags with a mark "Made in India" lying in rows. Every bag contained about 100 precious stones, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. They say that the box with precious stones was estimated in the amount of $377,000. Instead of running away with this treasure forever, the honest alpinist took it to the police. After that, it was transferred for keeping to the administration of Chamonix City in the east of France, where local authorities were trying to solve the mystery of its origin, and the prompt was hidden in the stamp "Made in India" due to a mysterious concourse of circumstances. 2 big air crashes of Indian planes took place in this area of the Mont Blanc Glacier. One crash took place in 1950. A Boeing 707 flying to New York via Geneva and London miscalculated its flight altitude and crashed into the peak of Mont Blanc. All 117 passengers and the crew died. As the result of the crash, there formed a crater on the slope of the mountain in which aircraft wreckage and other passengers' belongings are still lying. Specialists think that the treasures can be related with a family jewelry entrepreneur staying in London. Ancient clothes. This is what the tunic found at the height of 2,000 meters above sea level in Lambrine Glacier looked like. The melting of Lambrine Glacier in Norway enabled historians imagining what clothes from the Iron Age looked like. In 2011, a unique handmade woolen tunic was found. After 2 years of study, researchers found out that it was manufactured between 230 and 390 of our era, which means more than 1,500 years ago. It is quite probable that the tunic from Lambrine belonged to a warrior, a well-set-up man, 175 centimeters in height. Scientists are sure that global warming significantly accelerating the process of glacier melting, especially in Norway, could result in the increase of a number of archaeological discoveries. Who knows what unique findings are waiting for us below in an ice shield of glaciers next time? Aircraft wreckage. Instability and changeability of glaciers can be proved by the following story that took place in 1952 in Alaska. A plane with passengers on board crashed into the slope of Gannett Mountain and fell into pieces. Soon, a search team found the aircraft wreckage on the peak of the Colony Glacier, but in several days the wreckage together with the bodies were covered with a thick layer of snow and frozen into the glacier. Due to the worsening weather conditions, the search operation was suspended. In June 2012, a helicopter noticed aircraft wreckage protruding from a crack in the glacier, and the search was continued. Researchers found some parts of the place and body fragments, but had to postpone the search because of constant movement of the melting glacier. After that, in the summer of 2013, scientists discovered that from 1952, the wreckage had moved by 22.5 kilometers from the crash site, and some parts were lying at the bottom of Lake George because of the glacier movement. Remains of the First World War soldiers. People still find remains of soldiers, as well as other artifacts preserved from the times of the First World War near a small Italian village of Peo during glacier melting. In a fight known as the White War, soldiers of the Austro-Hungarian Empire fought against the Italian army for the mastery over the mountain area. According to the estimates of historians, hundreds of thousands of soldiers died during the fight, and many of them did not cope with the extreme weather. By that time, temperatures had dropped below 22 degrees and snow avalanches called the White Death covered whole troops. Many soldiers fighting in that place went missing. And now, almost a century ago, 80 mummified bodies buried under the melting glacier were raised to the surface. In 2004, a mountain guide witnessed a terrible picture. Bodies of 3 soldiers from the Austro-Hungarian army killed in 1918 were sticking out of the ice wall upside down. These frozen remains were found not far from San Mateo at the height of 3,600 meters above sea level. In 2013, the bodies of 2 more soldiers were found in a funeral pit of the melting glacier. Since they were lying below the ice for a long time, they had perfectly preserved hair and even cutaneous tissues. The glacier also contained the soldiers' personal belongings, such as a love letter addressed to Maria. Ancient forest. Mendenhall Glacier in Alaska has been keeping its own secret for several hundred years. It began to release branches, roots, and trunks of ancient trees at the age of about 1,000 to 2,000 years. Studying these trees makes the heart soar because we can determine their age. People usually found only small samples of ancient trees in parts, but in this case we get the whole forest at once. Scientists hope that the glacier will release the rest of the forest hidden from people's eyes at the very bottom under the thick ice. People face severe but exciting reality. Since 2005, Mendenhall Glacier has moved back by about 50 meters, thus enabling the whole national park of ancient trees getting to the surface in the nearest future. Frozen woolly baby rhinoceros. Scientists in Yakutia made a unique discovery. They found the remains of a woolly baby rhinoceros dating back to the end of the Pleistocene that began about 2 million years ago and ended about 10,000 years ago. It is the only found species in the world. According to the preliminary estimates of the Yakut paleontologists, this baby rhinoceros has perfectly preserved its soft tissues and its scalp is almost intact. This gives us the promise that this finding will help us to answer numerous questions related to the morphology and ethnogeny of these animals.